What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Joe with Odyssey Off-Road here. As you can see, we got two bikes in front of us, and they're both 250cc Enduro class dirt bikes. Both 2025 models. However, that's really where most of the similarities end. So you have, besides them being both 250 class dirt bikes, one's a two-stroke, you have the Husky TE250, and then one's a four-stroke, the WR250f. Both kind of in the same class, or they're sold in the same class. Both very different bikes. So kind of break it down for you a little bit here. I got some hours on this Husky now, and I feel like I can compare them relatively well in terms of what's, key differences between the two. And if you're looking for, a 250 class bike, you're not sure if you want a four-stroke or a two-stroke, maybe this will kind of help you narrow it down a little bit. So to begin, both bikes are absolutely awesome. And I will say there's a lot of overlap in the performance of both of them. So if you were to draw out a chart and say start at 1 to 10, and 1 being slow, technical, rocky, hard enduro stuff, and then slowly as you go up to 10 being high speed stuff, I would say the bikes overlap between 3 and 9 very well. The WR being better at the higher speed stuff, and down in the 1 or 2 where it gets really slow and technical and you want to pick your way through stuff. You want suspension a little softer, you want it to be able to lug a little bit better. That's where the two-stroke is better. So depending on what your type of riding is, mostly, that is basically what you want to determine first when you're choosing a bike. And then determine whether or not you want a two-stroke or a four-stroke. There's two-strokes that are just meant to go fast too. But most two-strokes are going to be better at going slow and picking your way through things than a four-stroke is going to be. There's obviously exceptions to the rule both ways, but for the most part, that's basically what it is that you're going to be looking at when you're comparing the two types of bikes. This specifically, these are obviously both headlight bikes, so both being enduro class bikes. You can get a Husqvarna or KTM equivalent 250 two-stroke without the headlight, and that's like the cross-country bike. Then you can also get the MX bike. The MX bike obviously is going to be mostly good at going fast. Cross-country bike is going to be good at doing everything as well. This is basically the cross-country bike a little tuned down. That's what your enduro models are. So for numbers' sake, let's talk about that for a minute. The Husky and the WR are both very similar in weight. The WR weighs in wet, full of fuel, ready to ride at 249, and the Husky weighs in around 243. So very similar in weight. It's only 6-pound difference. When you're driving both bikes, though, when you're on both bikes, when you're riding both bikes, it's when you're going fast, you don't notice it as much. But when the speeds slow down, you really notice the Husky feels significantly lighter. It feels lighter than 6 pounds difference. And that's just due to the two-stroke inertia thing. Four strokes have more engine braking. There's a little more inertia there with the four strokes. Whereas two-stroke is more free spooling. You let off the gas, just keeps coasting. It gives it the feel of being more lighter, which is the reason why it makes it better for going slow technical stuff. In terms of like suspension travel, the Husky's about 3/4 of an inch more. It's very close to 12 inches of suspension travel. The WR is about 11.5 inches suspension travel. So within a half inch, 3/4 of an inch suspension travel, you're not going to really notice that. You're never going to bottom out these suspension. Not in the type of riding I've done. I've been pretty aggressive with both. Not like motocross settings, but like in trail riding, with the clickers out on each, hit something, a washout in a trail or G out hard, and I've yet to bottom either suspension. They're both going to react completely different though. WR is set up much stiffer out of the box with the KYB suspension in that than the WP exact suspension in the Husky. Is set up much softer on the initial hit, but even with that being set up softer, it's still very good in the fast stuff because it's a very progressive feeling in the suspension. The more travel you use, the more you go down in the stroke, the more resistance it provides and resists bottoming. The WR is very stiff on the initial part of the stroke, almost like a digressive shock would be in the automotive world, like a digressive versus progressive shock dampening. That's how it feels. And it's just because it's set up, it's valved very stiff and it's sprung a little stiff on the Yamahas. That's just the way they come. But it makes it really, really good for going fast. So out of the box, if you're going to be a mid-speed, fast-paced rider, that's probably the better bike. If you're going to do a little mix of everything, which is what I'm doing, my fast riding is like 30 to 40 miles an hour. And, other than maybe hitting a fire road quick, we're heading to and from the trail from my house, I'll get up to speeds of 50, 55. I can click both bikes up into 6th gear, and they do them really, really well. You're strictly doing really high-speed stuff, say 35 and 40 miles an hour and up. The WR is probably the better bike for that. But if you're doing a mix of everything, which is an average trail rider, I think the WP suspension and the Husqvarna two-stroke motor, KTM equivalent, obviously too, gas even, they're all the same bike, is a little bit better for me. You guys are gonna have to make that decision for you, which one you think is better for you. But for doing everything, absolutely everything, the Husky right now anyway. As I am. It is really windy today. Stuff's blowing around the garage. So the Husky for me right now, because I'm starting to get into a little bit more technical trails, but I do a lot of flowy stuff too, in all honesty. But I've used the Husky here in a lot of the fast stuff, and it does great. So and I've hit some slower, rocky, technical stuff. That I wasn't comfortable at all with in the WR because of the way it's very snappy on the bottom with the power and the suspension being stiffer, and I'm much more comfortable on the Husky. So depending on your skill level, obviously if you're an A-class rider, you're going to ride either of these bikes, and you're going to be able to get your way through anything on both because your ability level. But most of us aren't A-class riders. I'm probably barely a C-class rider, so I've only been riding dirt bikes for a year. So my skill set is still kind of developing quite a bit. So for me, this bike, the two-stroke, makes it much easier for me to pick my way through the slower stuff, and I feel much more comfortable and confident doing it. So in terms of other differences, obviously to consider is going to be starting the bike, warming the bike up. It's a little bit different on a two-stroke than a four-stroke. These particular two-strokes warm up like a four-stroke does. You don't warm these TBI bikes, throttle body injected bikes, up like your old traditional two-stroke where you're ringing it out, you start it and keep blipping the throttle. You don't do that on these. Contrary to anything else you've heard on the internet, per Husqvarna KTM, these bikes, there's a cold start button. You hit that, and all that does is adds a little air to the initial circuit when you're warming it up. You turn that on, you fire the bike up, you let it idle 4 to 5 minutes till you get some heat in the radiators. At that point, you can click off the cold start just by simply rolling the throttle forward. And the WR is a cold start button too. We'll get into that in a minute. And then when you first start riding it, what happens is the Husqvarna and the KTMs with the throttle body injection, they have a different mapping in the ECU in the computer for warm-up. It's set to run very rich until the radiators reach a certain operating temperature. So if you're going to keep blipping the throttle at idle, if you're going to just let it idle without the cold start and keep hitting the throttle, you're dumping even more fuel and more oil in the cylinder, and that's how you foul plugs. So let it warm up the way that they recommend you to warm it up, and you're not going to have a problem. So once it's warm up enough where you're getting some heat in the radiators and you start going, you're going to take off slowly because it's still not quite up 100% to operating temperature. So you're going to kind of take off a little slow because you're going to feel the bike's not running that great. And all of a sudden, at some point, you're going to feel the bike's running way better because it's reached that operating temperature where the ECU is now switched the mapping to standard mapping from the warm-up cold start mapping, which is really, really rich. You're going to feel it's really, really rich, and it's not running well when you first take off. You're just going to ride around slow. For me, what I do is I start it, cold start, I let it idle 4 or 5 minutes here on the driveway. I feel some heat in the radiators. I click it off. I roll in. I take off out of my driveway. And as I'm going, getting through my neighborhood, really slow, low RPMs for a second gear bout. And by the time I reach the end of my neighborhood where I'm going to take off down the road and go hit the trails, it's warmed up and it's running good. So it's ready to roll. A 4-stroke, like this WR here, is significantly different and much easier to warm up. There's nothing to think about. And you warm it up like any other fuel-injected 4-stroke, like you would warm up your vehicle almost. I never used the cold start button. It doesn't really get cold enough here for me to need it here. I think I used it once when I first got it in the wintertime. It was really, really cold in the morning, and it needed it. It was cranking and wasn't firing right up. I hit cold start button, fired right up, left it off 10 seconds, shut it off, let it idle. So, and that's, so typically though, I just hit the start button, start the bike, let it idle a little bit, let it warm up, get some heat in the motor, and then take off and go riding. That's how you warm up a 4-stroke. Super easy. So those are all little things that, there's definitely some nuances to a 2-stroke that you don't have with a 4-stroke. And, you also have to ride them differently. So 4-stroke's very happy with just a constant RPM, throttle, cruising on a trail. 2-strokes, you kind of like on and off the throttle. That's how you ride them. Ride them like a 4-stroke typically. So those are all things that you have to think about. You want to deal with that on a 2-stroke, ride it. You have to ride it a little different. You don't get any engine braking. If you're going downhill and you like a little bit of engine braking to help slow you down, and you don't have to. The WR's got the perfect amount of engine braking. If I'm going down some descents, not major steep descents, you're going to need to use your brakes at that point. But if you're just rolling down some hills, rather than it just keep like picking up speed like you would on a 2-stroke, and because it's just coasting and going faster and faster, it just maintains speed. You keep it in a gear, let it idle down, and it'll just coast down, won't pick up speed and get out of control away from you. 2-stroke, you're going to need to work the brakes a little more because you're not going to have that engine braking. It's going to roll down and keep picking up momentum like a snowball going downhill. So those are all things to consider. There may be a little bit more cost in certain ways with a 2-stroke as opposed to the 4-stroke, and there may be other costs to a 4-stroke that there isn't for a 2-stroke. So we'll kind of go over that here now. So the 2-stroke up front, you're going to need 2-stroke oil. On this particular one, it's oil injected, so you fill the oil tank separate, and it injects the 2-stroke oil separately from the fuel. You put straight fuel in here. That oil tank lasts about approximately 4 tanks of fuel. So you're going to have to buy 2-stroke oil besides your 4-stroke oil for your gear case when you change your oil, and you're going to have to keep that topped off. So that's 2 types of oil you're going to need to buy. But you don't need oil filters, because the oil, when you do an oil change on a 2-stroke, it's only on the transmission side, so there's no oil filter there. When you change your oil, obviously, on a 4-stroke, you have an oil filter you have to change as well. So that's a little bit of an added cost. They both use approximately the same amount of oil in that regard. But you're going to have no oil filter on that, but you're going to need 2-stroke oil. You're going to need an oil filter on a 4-stroke, but obviously you don't need 2-stroke oil. The expensive stuff comes into when you start getting a lot of hours on these bikes. You get 150, 200 hours. Both of these bikes are pretty capable of doing that without needing, a top end rebuild. When I say top end, meaning piston and rings. If you're really take care of your 4-stroke, like particularly Yamahas, they're pretty bulletproof motors. If you really take care of this bike and you're not racing it, you're not like wringing it out 10,000 RPMs pinned all the time and you're just trail riding it, you can get hundreds of hours out of this bike as long as you change your oil regularly, keep clean air filters, and clean oil. It should last you a long time. The two-stroke, by the time you get to about 150 hours, you should consider a top end, even if you're not riding it aggressive. At least consider a new piston and ring. That's significantly cheaper on a two-stroke because you don't have a lot to take apart. You take the head off, the jug, and the piston's right there. Pop a new piston and ring in, and slide the jug over it, and you're good to go. You're going to have to calibrate your power valve and all that stuff, but that's fairly simple to do. On a four-stroke, it's a significantly more expensive job because you have to take the head off with the cams, you have a timing chain, you have all that stuff. It's a little more cumbersome for a do-it-yourselfer. So if you're somebody who has decent mechanic skills, you could probably tackle a two-stroke top end. A four-stroke top end, it gets a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more involved. You may be more comfortable taking this to a shop to have a top end on. But like I said already, you may not need a top end on this bike for quite a long time compared to a two-stroke. So I think most people don't keep their bikes more than 100 and some odd hours. People with dirt bikes tend to rotate them out. So if that's you, you don't have to worry about that on either bike. It's fine. But that is things to consider. Here's a biggie to consider if you're doing long rides. I do tend to do some long rides sometimes. You're going to get significantly better fuel range out of a four-stroke than you are going to out of a two-stroke. This two-stroke comes with a bigger fuel tank, but it gets less. But you get significantly less miles per gallon than you do on a four-stroke. That WR right there, I average anywhere between 45, depending on how you're riding it, between 45 and 55 miles per gallon. So I can get anywhere between 85 to 110 miles out of a tank. It's a 2-gallon tank. On this bike here, I haven't stretched it or did a fuel mileage test yet. My best guess right now is I can get about 60 to 65 miles out of a tank. I have yet to do more than 62 miles on a single ride. So I think I might be able to get away with that with this bike, just carrying in one extra fuel jug for safety. So those are things to consider. If you're doing really long rides and you want the fuel mileage, four-stroke's going to be a little bit better choice for you, because you're not going to get the fuel range, even though this is fuel injected. You're not going to get the fuel range on a two-stroke. They just burn more gas naturally, because they're creating combustion every single upstroke of the piston, where on a four-stroke you're creating combustion every other upstroke. So when you stroke of an engine, that's why this is called a two-stroke versus a four-stroke. The way a two-stroke engine works is piston comes up, that's one stroke. Then when it comes down, that's two. Back up, it's firing again. Every time it comes back up, it's firing. On a four-stroke, it comes up, you have one. That's your compression, combustion stroke. Then it explodes, forces it down, comes back up, exhausts, the gas is out, the exhaust valve is open, goes back down again, and then comes back up and fires again. So it only fires on every other upstroke. On two-stroke, it fires every upstroke. So you're injecting fuel twice the amount that you are on a four-stroke. That's one of the reasons why you're using a lot more gas. It also, the gas and the oil is lubricating the top end of the motor on a two-stroke as opposed to a four-stroke. Another thing to consider is price. Now, traditionally, four-strokes are more expensive than two-strokes. However, in today's day and age, things have kind of taken a turn. So depending on what brand you buy, let's compare just Yamahas for a minute. So Yamaha also sells two-strokes. They're the only Japanese company currently, even though Kawasaki has teased coming back out with two-strokes. They haven't officially released anything yet. And Yamaha and Honda doesn't make anything. Neither does Suzuki. So you have two-strokes from Yamaha. You can get the YZ250 and the YZ250X. The YZ250X is the off-road version of the YZ250. So let's say you're cross-shopping and you're only going to buy Yamahas. YZ250X is about $1,000 cheaper than the WR250. So, but you don't get a headlight, you don't get tail light, you don't get a radiator fan, you don't get electric start. There's a lot of things you don't get. It's very raw and simple, that bike. Now, if you're comparing Husky 4-stroke or KTM 4-stroke and 2-strokes, they're very similar in price. If you're looking at a 250 or 300 2-stroke with them, you're going to expect to pay out the door anywhere between 12.4 to 13.4, or if you get the really high-end models, you can get high 13s, like the hard enduro versions and stuff like that, or the pros. And then when their 4-strokes aren't much difference in price. So you get an FE 350 or an FX 350, something like that. You're going to can expect to pay, unless you get one left over end of the year. If you get a current model year one, you're going to expect to pay, between 12 and 13 and change for that bike out the door at most places. There's obviously going to be exceptions to the rule depending on where you live. They don't sell as fast and dealers blowing them out, but that's typically what you can expect to pay. So price difference, not that much unless you're shopping the 250X versus the WR and 2-strokes. If you're looking at the Austrian 2-strokes, they're quite expensive. You can go with the gases. They're a little cheaper on both 2-strokes and 4-strokes because they just take a little bit. There's a little less bells and whistles on the gas line of bikes than there is the Husqvarna KTM. The Husqvarna has more bells and whistles than most of them, and then your KTM's are a little more race ready. They come with a more open air box, stuff like that. So hopefully this video helped some of you guys out trying to decide between you're looking at a mid-bore bike 250 range, and you're not sure if you want to go 2-stroke, 4-stroke. These are some things to think about, some things that I would consider if I were you. I'm no expert by any means, but these are just some things I feel are important and things you may want to consider when cross shopping these things. I suggest you go to a dealer and actually put eyes and hands on something that you may be thinking about buying, because when you see them up close and personal, and you may see things and realize certain features it has and doesn't have that you thought maybe it did come with or didn't come with. Look at the spec sheets on the dealers, on the manufacturer's websites. That's the best place to go for information, is the manufacturer's websites. Go to the Husqvarna website, go to the KTM website, go to the Yamaha website, go to the Honda website. Read all the specs and the features and stuff like that on the particular bike you're looking at. That's going to be your best source of information, not asking these questions on the Facebook forum where you're going to get 50 different wrong answers. So get it from the source. Educate yourself before you make the purchase. This way you don't make the wrong one and cost yourself some money. All right, so this is Joe at Odyssey Off-Road. Hopefully this video is beneficial for one of you out there and helping you make a decision. I love both bikes equally. Unfortunately, I do have to let one go, and it's going to be the Yamaha here, just because I only just bought the Husky. I don't have a lot of ride time on it as much. I have 35 hours here on the Yamaha. It's been an absolutely outstanding bike, and I wouldn't be opposed to buying another one in the future. But for right now, financial reasons, I can only keep one. So the new owner for this bike is actually coming to pick it up. He's on his way here now, and this one will be going. So this is Joe at Odyssey Off-Road. Smash that thumbs up button if you like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And we will see you guys on the trail and in the next video. Ride safe.